This is F.D. Recovery, where we interview addicts and alcoholics.
Our aim is that through this podcast, we might help you on your journey of recovery.
Thank you for listening. Hello, this is Frank with F.D. Recovery, and today I have with me...
My name is Shelly.
Her name is Shelly. So this is the weekly intention. So basically what we do, we go week to week with spiritual principles and or topics, and we work it in our recovery and in our lives. So this week will be love. Love. So this week will be love. We all are, at least for me, I know I lacked a lot of love in recovery. But before we jump into that, we will recap on fear. So how did fear recap for you? How did it work?
See. This last week, fear, not purpose, fear. Well, there were a few different situations where there was some tension and conflict with you and I. And what I have learned is, whenever I'm in tension or conflict, whether it's relationship or work or what have you, I sit in that fear for a minute and I don't like it. And my default reaction is to ignore it, right? Or act on all behaviors. But now it's easier for me to overcome. I've learned to pause, try and step away from the situation mentally and kind of see what's going on, what's the root of it, what's the issue, and then address it head on. Like I talked about last week, just moving through fear, I have to take that breath and confront it, because that's how I'm going to get through it. I may not like the reaction or how it plays out, but that's how I'm going to get through it fastest. And I don't ignore it anymore. So I'm learning to pause and reflect and figure out, what's going on and communicate that.
Communicate. Well, the whole fear thing, right? The thing is, you come on here and you'd be like, oh, fear, right? Yeah, I really, executed it. But for me, it was just like, I just felt more of it. All right. I felt, I guess when you're working on something or you're trying to highlight it, right? Sometimes it comes into your life in an amplified way. It's like when people talk about I prayed to God for purpose. You hear a lot of people in the room. So just be careful. You pray for for patience and sorry, I meant patience, not purpose. But you pray to God for patience, and all of a sudden you get assholes and everybody. You get all this shitstorm of things, right? And I think that's somewhat true, because I do believe our mind is a magnet, right? So when you start focusing on something, it's like the art of attention, right? If you're dealing with something or something's in your forefront of your mind, everything's gonna start falling under that
umbrella.
That umbrella, and you look at everything red, all of a sudden that's all you see, right? And so the important thing to do is, when you're working this stuff, understanding that stuff's going to come up. And, I handled it better than I have in the past. And so the whole thing with this is just the baby steps, progress, not perfection. Sometimes we were talking about this on Friday in our meeting, the men's meeting I was attending, and I said, the whole thing is, we get into this recovery thing and we think it's like a perfection thing, right? because a lot of my like a lot of my stuff with that I've learned with like religion and things that taught you morals, like there was a whole perfection aspect that I thought you had to be, right? And that was some of my misconceptions with religion or Christ or Buddha, all these things that for me you can find truths in, right? And I had this misconception that you had to be perfect, and that was my own bias situation on it. But and it doesn't help that some of the religion, the people that push the religion kind of, it does come off on that. Let's be completely realistic, and I've had bad experiences with religion, people that, tell you how to live, but then they don't really live it themselves. So there was a struggle for me growing up and understanding and seeing the hypocrisy in others, which was just alive and well in me as well. So there was no difference. It was just frustrating in a sense of like when some of these people were trying to pretend they were perfect and they would live another way, right? So I allowed that for me to just kind of get instilled with me that I had to be this perfect person, right? I couldn't be a hypocrite and I couldn't be all these things, even though I was, right?
Think about it. How many people have you met in and out of your addiction that have that OCD, like they have to do everything
Mm,
perfect or to an extreme?
yeah.
I mean, no matter what that looks like, there's a lot of people that I've met, again, in and out of my recovery, in and out of my life, that they want to perform at 100%. Then on the flip side, you've got that fear of failure and the fear of the unknown if you don't follow through with that perfection. And a lot of people don't or can't. It's just not realistic. Then they're living in that fear and
Mm.
so on and so forth.
So the 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 good segue for this, right? We got to be mindful of the time. So, but the good segue to all this, what I really think helps conquer fear, among other things, right? But introducing some love in the situation, right? Because,
It's a foundation of everything that we do.
yeah.
All of our relationships and, survival is linked to loving in some sort.
Well, my whole life I've never really understood what love was, right? I've never really could. I knew what infatuation was. I knew what lust was. I didn't really know what love was until, I'm gonna be completely honest, this time we had Rhea, right? Because don't get me wrong, it was there with my oldest. It's just, there was a lot of outside factors that switched the scenario where
Mm.
I couldn't, really be in that dad role, right? Due to my addiction, and also, me and the ex couldn't see eye to eye, so that didn't help, right?
Well,
And
there's
there,
something untainted when it comes to the birth of a child or introducing that when you are in a clear headspace. There's something there that you can't compete when you're under the influence. I know a lot of people who have had kids and they've been high or the significant other and they're just not present. So
yeah.
I could be empathetic with that feeling of feeling one versus another, especially when you've had a couple of kids and your mindset's completely different between one and another.
Yeah, going back to the whole, stumbling upon what, and it's I experienced love, and I'm learning what love is, and I'm learning to love myself, right? And through that, though, having the new addition, um, the intense passion, as far as if I could, if anything was to happen to her, or, and I think, the intense fear, like just something that crosses the mind when I'm overthinking, as far as what if she gets sick, what if she gets hurt, what if she chokes on food, all these things that I'm
Don't mean to
really.
laugh on that, but for you listeners out there, one of the things that Frank and I constantly butt heads on is a little bit about me growing up is I was always in a caretaker role. I've always had younger siblings in my life, and taking care of kids has been very huge. So my understanding on what a kid can eat and not eat realistically differs from you because you don't necessarily have a lot of that experience with younger children. So uh, let's just say we're learning to find a balance there. And every time I give our daughter a piece of food, and Frank's in the room, he's like, "You've got this evil set of eyes on me constantly, like I'm out to just like, oh, Rhea, here's a big piece of chicken. I want you to choke on it. Yeah, like, yeah, that's my end game here. So,
Well,
anyways,
you can never be too
careful.
careful, right? Well,
Parenting.
so that brings me back to
Love.
this intense love, right? And then it comes out in ways that I don't, because I'm still learning it,
Mm-hmm.
right? And and all of my ways to love was always really tainted, right? It was always connected to violence. It was
Mm-hmm.
always connected to some sort of maladaptive technique on how I learned to adapt to life, right? And it was never this, oh, wholehearted, I'm your mom, dad. It was always chaotic. My parents really didn't show much affection,
They
nothing
didn't tell
like
you
that.
loved you, like on a
No,
hugged
no.
you, kissed you good night, say I love you, see you in the morning.
No,
Yeah.
and if it did happen, it was well within the 1 to 2 years before my memory happens, right? And that's just not something they ever did. My biological mother would do it, but I didn't really get to know her until I was in my late teens, right? And so having said that and experiencing all this stuff with like love, it's a pretty new thing,
Hmm.
right? And we're all just kind of, oh, before we start.
I was wondering. So we usually give you a definition of the spiritual principle or purpose we're going to talk about, and we clearly missed that. Frank
Oh
was
yeah.
really excited to talk about love.
Love.
So I had Googled specifically the love definition in recovery because love is such a general, yeah, there's so many definitions. So how it pertains to this. In the context of recovery, love is a vital driving force that fosters emotional healing,
Mm,
creates supportive communities, and reinforces self-worth. It involves self-love as a foundational element characterized by kindness, self-care, and accepting one's worth, as well as love from others through supportive relationships and community connections. Love and recovery is a practice of caring for oneself and others, often involving forgiveness, establishing healthy boundaries, and letting go of fear, which can lead to increased serenity, mental freedom, and long term sobriety. So, no, before that, I'm curious, what is your own personal definition of love now versus then? If you could put it into words in any sort of way,
well,
was it just chaos
Google
or,
stole my definition,
oh,
so I
okay.
just want to make the viewers aware of that.
Hmm.
So
PSA.
the then and now is entirely different, right?
Hmm.
Uh, my sense of love, it was control, right? Especially
Mm.
with the significant other, I needed to control because I was just, there was a lot of unknown variables when I was young. There wasn't any love. There was a lot of violence. There was a lot of shaky ground. There was never stability as far as emotional support and stuff like that. So I think it translated through, I thought I had to control all the factors to even sustain something and worth keeping it around, right? And I thought, and I still think in many ways that I have to control factors. It's a little different now, right? I've learned to experience life, and I know now, I know people's potential intentions of others,
Mm.
right? So now it comes from, yes, a more protective area, but nonetheless it still has its controlling factors, right? So I'm trying to navigate the good and bad, right? Today I know love as the self love, right?
Mhm.
I know love as I need to take care of myself and what's going on in me, and learn to love the person that I see in the mirror in its entirety, and understanding that I'm going to fall short constantly.
Mhm.
I'm gonna have that negative self-talk. I'm gonna think I'm ugly. I'm gonna think I'm all these things that aren't just, they're just embedded in fear, right? The fear
Mhm.
of not being enough, not being adequate, not being a man. Am I doing enough? For a man, the battle is much different, right?
Mhm.
And in recovery, and unless you're in recovery, a lot of men really struggle with that, right? Because we're only really we're only really as good as what we can bring to the table, what we can provide, all these things, right? Until I hit recovery, I started realizing there's a whole subculture of love, especially with men and men, right? Loving up on each other in recovery. And I just never knew that camaraderie, right? I was
Unless
always,
it was in jail.
even then, right? It was, besides all the jokes, it's like
Hmm.
that was, that brotherhood of even committing crimes and stuff like that. I was always more keen to that, right? But in a sense, you could never trust anyone, right?
Hmm.
So introducing that whole factor to my life in recovery as opposed to my life using is much different. I know that I cannot live a successful life without trust. I know I can. Not, I remember a couple years ago, or multiple years ago, now it's maybe going on a decade. I was in jail, right, and I was so unaware about the definitions between anything like a spiritual principle that this guy got a card in the mail, right? And it said trust and love, right? And the saying was you can love somebody without trusting them and blah blah blah. It was vice versa. I can't remember what it was, right? And I had no clue what it meant because I just was so unversed with trust and love and not really knowing what it was on either end. I didn't even really know the definition, right? And not because I mean, don't get me wrong, I had trouble in school and all that crap, but it was just like I didn't even know the definition. I couldn't even tell you what it was, right? I just knew the on the street don't trust nobody, right? I didn't really know what it was. I didn't know what the definition of love was, and I didn't even know the difference. I didn't know trust and love were different. I just figured, well, if I love you, then I must trust you. I didn't realize those are whole two different things.
Hmm.
I can love somebody and not trust them because of their actions, right? I can wholeheartedly love somebody, but they can do distrusting things that make me, well, I don't necessarily trust this person. It's like living with an addict. You love them to death, but you know they're going to steal your money out of your purse, so you don't trust them, right? And I've lived, and I didn't even realize that connection until years later. I remember having that conversation. And the funny thing is there are a whole bunch of other drug addicts that couldn't even answer the question either. Right? What's the difference between trust and love? And we didn't have a dictionary at the time, right? Because for some reason, whoever had the dictionary, it wasn't available to us. But we asked the guard coming in, and he broke it down for us, right? And I don't remember any of the conversation, but I just remember not knowing what it meant, right? And that was kind of crazy because that's how far removed it was from my reality, right? I didn't know the difference. I didn't know what was what, right? And today, digging into the spiritual principles and trying to work some of these daily things in our life, right? These spiritual principles, it really changes the aspect of you ask the then and now. I mean, back then, I didn't even know what the difference was between trust and love. I didn't even have a clue. I just thought they were one and the same, right? I didn't realize, and it sounds silly, but it's just the way it was, right? So as far as the whole love factor, the whole self love is, I think, the most important thing out of this, right? Because if you can't love yourself, you're going to have a really hard time translating that over to a relationship.
So to sum it up, love then was chaos,
Hmm.
and love now is
A lesson,
okay.
learning, right? Today, I'm learning what love's all about. I'm learning to love myself. I'm getting more and more familiar with it every day. There's more and more moments where I feel calm and content with who I am and where I'm going and what my situation is. I don't feel this discontent that I used to all the time. Like I need to do more. I need to do better. So for me, what love translates to is those brief moments where I can find that serenity, right? That peace. And that's how it translates to me
Mm.
today, right? It's
Well, I
just a
mean,
big lesson.
like you said, Google stole your definition. Love and recovery is the practice of caring one itself, often including letting go of fear and increased serenity and mental freedom.
Yeah.
When you talk about, what men and women struggle with when it comes to self-worth and what they can bring to the table. And mind you, I'm not a man, but I can understand where you're coming from on that. But being a female and dealing with loving myself and who I am, even the parts that I don't like, has always been a struggle. And I met a lot of women who feel the same. And there's this element that we grow up with, the Barbie dolls and the toy trucks. And women for a long time have been, we have to be the caretakers, we have to be the mothers, we have to make sure we keep a happy and a clean home, and if everything is in order, you also are dealing with the pressures of society to look a certain way,
Mm.
dress a certain way, behave a certain way, be seen, not heard. Up until the more recent last 20 years, mind you, I'm not that old, but from my observation, um things have changed and people are becoming more aware of mental health. And for women, we really struggle with that because we've never really had an avenue to voice our opinions and be heard, but also feel like we're being heard, especially by the other sex. We're viewed as a lesser of, and that they could go on to so many different things and different avenues that are unrelated to what we're talking about. But I've always dealt with loving myself and being held to a certain standard that I just either couldn't reach because of what I was given or the limitations I've put on myself. That now that I've found recovery and I am able to stay sober and be more okay with me each day, I'm learning to love myself a little bit more. For me, loving others was never really a problem. My friends and my family, there was always a sense of genuine love there, and I could relate to the trust thing as well. There's some people in my family, I won't be super specific as to who, what, why, when, and where, but that I
You
love
don't want to
them.
drop the drama here?
It's not worth it. I love them with all of my heart, but my respect as well as my trust are very damaged, and it's going to take a long road to get back to where we were if we were ever even there. So,
But that's, you were, you talk about the difference between men and women. We all have our burdens to
roles.
bear, right? And when it comes to the gender thing and the struggles that we all face as an individual, not necessarily gender, but that plays a big role. We all have our own set of uh adverse challenges that we have to face, right? And not one's bigger than the other. I do believe that mental health on both ends are super important to face. I am envious because women, they're so, they could always like tap into that emotional part for themselves
Hmm.
much easier, which is, it comes with its own challenges, but that's one thing as a man that I've always struggled with, and that's what men struggle with. That's why,
Vulnerability.
yeah.
A lot of men don't feel comfortable sharing those emotions, so they have to have a thick wall. And a part of me is really grateful with how this last decade has played, and people coming woke and all this other things that we don't need to get into. But just generally what I'm saying is more people are being aware, whether you're a man or a woman, that our struggles are still the same when it comes down to it.
Yeah.
We all struggle with love and trust and letting go of fear and these healthy relationships. And we all struggle with that in some areas more than others, depending on the person.
It's just, there's a challenge. The challenge out there is finding that common ground, whether whatever race, sex, whatever gender, anything that, whatever walk of life you're on, you got to, you just got to respect the human experience and what somebody else is going through.
Mm-hmm.
You don't always have to agree with them, because that's not the point. If we just all agreed and nodded our head and just there would be nothing ever really challenging our environment, and that's where all innovation happens, right? Is thinking different, thinking outside the box, ingenuity, all these things that, like, the beautiful things that come from some of that our differences is what really our strength is, right? And because it would be pretty boring if everybody was the same, right? And
Absolutely.
I think that sometimes what happens is, as a society, we tend to focus on the differences rather than the similarities, and it's because it's super easy,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's super easy to notice all the wrong in the world, because that's. But when you're looking at it, and you're training on yourself in the eyes of love, right? And you're trying to see this other person as a human being, and really trying to live in empathy, you start thinking about the human experiences that they probably went through. They were a baby,
Mm-hmm.
right? They were a toddler. They were a preteen. They were a teenager, and then moved into adulthood, depending if they're young or not. But most people that I deal with that are roughly around the same age as, or in adulthood, you got to remember that they've been through their walk of life too,
Mm-hmm.
right? And when you start reminding yourself with
That the
this,
person next to you is a person.
yeah, right, and dropping the expectations, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think that that's a good way for me to kind of circle back, and
Open up the love door.
yeah, and I think it's easier with, and it sounds silly, but it's easier with strangers rather than close
Mm-hmm.
people in your life, because, sometimes we take things out on our significant others, or we take things out on people that we know are going to be there because they're our stone, right? And obviously, we want to move to a better place in our recovery where we're not doing that,
Mm-hmm.
but at the same time, you have to remember that the people that are around you, they're going to see the best to you and the worst to you, right? And
That's a good point. Because with strangers, you can be an open book until
mm-hmm.
you don't want to, and you can shut that door just as easily as you opened
Because
it.
it was barely open. You're kind of just cracking it open, and just for that brief conversation, and maybe a 5 minute interaction. But you got somebody that's around you and seeing the thick of it, in more than 5 minutes that we
Mm-hmm.
interact with somebody. And so I do believe that focusing your support group and getting people that are really trustworthy and that really have your best interests in mind, because you got to remember, when someone's at their worst, and you're going to be a support, whether it's your wife, husband, whether it's sponsor, your friend in recovery, you got to be very choosy about these people, because they're going to be that person that's going to navigate you in those tough times, and then vice versa,
Well, you're
right?
building a community, and the
Yeah.
only way to do that is to be open and willing, and have love. Because if you want to build a community in your recovery and your support system, and you've got all this anger and hate and frustration, and you just keep that door open, maybe a crack, you know, all you all you're doing is letting, a hate seep through and not letting that love in. It's mandatory in order to transform into something better.
Well, it goes back to that open mind factor, right? My sponsor told me that, by definition, if your mind is closed, you can't let anything in or out, right? And it's very important
Mm-hmm.
that when it comes to these beliefs and some of these thought patterns, and some of these, some of these things that we're trying to walk along this journey of recovery, we're we got to get to a point to where we can get trust with our support group, and yada yada, all these spiritual gifts that we're talking about, right? And try to root it in love, but it's so much more difficult than it's easy to come on here and talk a good game, and go out there and talk a good game, but what
Gotta
happens
walk the
when,
walk.
yeah, what happens when the stress is on, things, you got a flat tire, all these things that go against us, right? And those are those times where you really gotta those are my biggest learning moments, is when the shit hits the fan and I start behaving a certain way. Then I need to recalibrate. Okay, I'm going to do better next time that comes around. And so far I have done better than, in a lot of those same situations. Right. And that's due to self-love, is just understanding that I made mistakes and I made my life harder. And that when you're trying to love yourself, that's not a smart move.
Mm-mm.
Right. So,
The
getting back to
progress,
this, yeah,
non-perfection thing is
hmm
immediately what I think of.
yeah.
Self-love, and just because you don't get it right the first time doesn't mean it can't be better.
So this week we're gonna wrap up because we got to get her back to work. But
Got to bring home the bacon.
bring home the bacon, the cheese, the Gouda, whatever you want to call it, right? But this week, weekly intention is love. So go out there, spread a little cheer and love, and hopefully brighten someone's day. Try to do something nice and not get caught, right? That's the best way to do it, right? Well, because
Sorry.
I know it sounds funny, but most people are just trying to do things for recognition. It's I remember back
Do the
coming
right
to
thing when no one's looking.
yeah, try to do
Makes
something
sense.
nice and not get caught, right? Because most of the time, everything is, for me, is hidden with motives and all this, and everything has to be a look at me. And right when you do some digging within yourself and you're really trying to focus on this life, it's like, just trying to do things that just make the world a better place, and that's pretty rare in this world, right? At least right now. Um, yeah, that's all. That's all we
Peace,
got.
love, and hippie dust. Minus
Yeah.
the hippie dust.
Yeah, not too much hippie dust, because I'd done some of that, and
That's
I'll
why
tell
we're
you
here.
what. Scratch the hippie dust. We've done too much. When is the point of no return with hippie dust? That's
That's probably
so
bad
FD.
choice of words on my end. I'm sorry, guys. I didn't mean to trigger anybody.
FD. Well, hey, if you're triggered, then you're in the right spot and you're listening to the right podcast. All right, this is FD Recovery. This week's weekly intention is love.
Love.
All right, we out. Peace. Thank you for tuning in to FD Recovery. A reminder, be kind to yourself on this journey of recovery. Also, call your sponsor, get connected to local support groups, and for one day at a time, stay clean and sober.